One of the most difficult things about programming is learning how to learn. It can feel so overwhelming because there are a million different paths to take, and people find it difficult just to start. In a similar way, people get comfortable where they're at and don't know how to branch out. As someone who's had a mix of both structured and unstructured education, I've compiled a list of tips to learn how to learn the web in 2020. Let's go. So, who's this for? Well, beginners, individuals trying to find their first job, as well as engineers who may be employed but feel like they're getting stuck and don't know how to branch out. As I was compiling this list of tips, I wrote it with myself in mind when I was just learning to code. While I feel like I eventually got the hang of learning, it took me a long time, and I think these tips would have made learning to code a little more structured and approachable. So I like to describe this as project-based learning. I view programming like learning a new language. You're going to need a certain amount of context, but that context I think is minimal. Projects introduce us to what is possible. I think I truly started to believe this when I first learned React. For whatever reason, I followed a tutorial and it just clicked for me, and so I decided to do another project after that. And I found that doing a series of projects rather than a bunch of random videos about how React works was able to get through my head what it looked like to program in React rather than what React looked like, if that makes any sense. And honestly, I think work is like this. Most jobs are going to be project-based. You're not just going to have a bunch of random things every day that don't have anything to do with each other. You'll have bigger projects called epics that you're going to chip away at, doing smaller pieces one at a time. The same thing is true if you're going to start a business. If you want to start an online software company, that's one big project, and it's going to be composed of smaller projects. So I think viewing code through the paradigm of projects is a good thing to get in the habit of. Now, that doesn't mean the technical side of things isn't important. It is. It's just not necessary on day one. It's easier to grasp the concepts once we actually have a frame of reference. Again, going back to language, it's like trying to learn grammar before we actually know simple phrases. For example, I learned German. I didn't just take it in high school. I moved to Germany, and I actually learned the language. Now, I had obviously taken grammar, which I would view as the technical side, but I wasn't able to fully understand any of that until I went through those uncomfortable experiences of having conversations with real Germans and not having a clue what was going on. After those, I was able to go back and actually understand why the grammar was the way it was, because I had a frame of reference. So I think a way to apply this to programming is sort of going forward and then look back. Do a project that's going to introduce you to new principles, and once you're done, look back and understand why those things are the way they are. Now, I think what's also extremely important is setting a schedule. Dreams are goals with a deadline, so you need to write that shit down. I'm a firm believer in 30-day challenges. This is because you can plan plans, but you can't plan results. That kid right there, he's dreaming. I don't see a calendar. He's not going anywhere. Now, some other things that I think are worth keeping in mind are, first of all, you shouldn't be comparing yourself to other people today. You should be comparing yourself to yourself yesterday. Everyone learns at a different rate, and especially when it comes to programming, it's so typical to have these aha moments where you struggle through something for a week or a month or even longer, and then it finally clicks and your learning accelerates extremely. You can't just look at someone else's opinion of how long it should take to learn HTML versus CSS and then JavaScript and different principles. I think everyone has to figure that out for himself or herself. And that's primarily why I didn't want to give a recommended calendar of what to learn when, because it's just different for everyone. And the only way you're going to fully know what you're good at learning and what you're bad at learning is by doing it. So what's some general learning advice? Well, first of all, code is like building blocks. If you can't solve a problem, break it down into smaller problems. Then repeat that for each of those smaller problems. If you can't solve one of those smaller problems, break it down again. For example, one problem might be you need to build this website. Well, what does that mean? Well, that's obviously not something you're going to do in one step, so you might have to break that down. You might ask, what's the information I need to display? Where's that information going? And how's the best way that I want to present that? And you'll take each of those things separately and keep drilling down on each. You'll obviously put the bulk of things in one place. You might also need a nav bar. Okay, well, how do I do a navbar? At that point, you might research unordered lists, different hover effects, and as you go through these steps, you're going to be learning a bunch of different things one at a time without even thinking too much about it, because your goal is to just build that site. I think it's also very important to understand principles. Those are the kind of things you want to write down and make sure you fully comprehend. While syntax can be Googled, knowing how to get the length of an array in JavaScript versus Java is something that you're just going to memorize as you do it. It's so much less important to know the syntax than it is understanding the approach you want to take when structuring data. And those are the things that when you're following tutorials are going to be extremely important to note. So what are some good beginner project ideas? Well, I think a good starter one is writing a resume on an HTML document. You'll get the hang of basic syntax and basic styling, and it hopefully will just get you comfortable with opening up an editor, writing some kind of code, going to the page, viewing it, refreshing it, and updating it. When it comes to styling, I've always been a big fan of just fake business websites. You can probably find a million designs on Google, and I think that's a good place to start. You don't need to be a designer. All you have to do is learn how to put things where you want to put them. Once you're able to do that decently well, figure out how to make them mobile friendly. You'll learn media queries, and at that point you start to build up somewhat of a portfolio, and maybe you find yourself building the marketing website for a local coffee shop that you know. I think another really good CSS project is build your own personal website. Start your online presence and get yourself out there. As for JavaScript project ideas, I think a cool one is a cost calculator, where you can add items, set their cost and their quantity, and it gives you the total. You'll start to learn about transferring information. Another really good one that's probably good practice, even for more experienced developers, is writing sign-up form authenticators. You can add date validation for more complexity, and as you get better at JavaScript, there are more and more different ways that you can improve it. Animations, cool effects, and so that's not limited to beginners. I think cliche to-do lists are also a good idea, especially when you're picking up a new framework. The main reason for that is you're dealing with state management, re-renders, and I think those are all good things just to introduce you to a new framework. Even doing it in vanilla JavaScript's a good idea. A final good idea that I saw somewhere was write a word and character counter. It's good practice for events and DOM manipulation. Maybe you give the number of words and the number of characters with and without spaces. Again, these are just small projects that you can take and build out just to kind of test where you're at, and maybe you run into some problems that you're going to have to solve, and in that process, you're going to be learning new things. Now, I do want to note, especially when it comes to JavaScript, I think tutorials are a great place to start, but you shouldn't stop there. Watching things be done is a lot different than doing them yourself. I can't tell you how many times I've watched a video about either maybe a new framework or some part of JavaScript that I thought I completely understood, and then I did it, and I ran into problems, one after the next. So anytime you're following along with a video, I think it's a good idea to take whatever you were watching, alter the idea somewhat, and rebuild it from scratch. It'll force you to make sure that you fully internalize the information that you're hearing. So, what are some final thoughts? Well, these tips work for everything. Whether it's machine learning, maybe a new backend language, or even non-programming things that you want to learn. If you want to learn the guitar, I think it's equally applicable. One project might be a song, and so you'll do projects, but it's also then important to learn the technical side, the music theory, and so on. It's also important to remember, simple is not the same thing as easy. What I'm saying is extremely simple, but it's not a shortcut. It's just a blueprint. I don't want you to come away from this thinking you found the easy way to learn. Complex things are hard to learn. Simpler things are going to be easier to learn. And this is simply a tool that should hopefully make learning more efficient. Now, the good thing about this is if you come away from this learning C#, it wasn't me who did that for you. You put the work in, you get the credit. Like I said, this is just a blueprint which may make learning feel more concrete. I think another good analogy is that learning to code is like working out. It starts out being extremely difficult, but you pick up momentum in no time. You might find yourself 3 days into your 30-day challenge, and after each day you feel like you've got nothing done. It's just difficult and you're not getting anywhere. But by the end of the first week or second week, you're breezing along and your sessions go from 30 minutes to 2 hours because you just get on a run. So don't be concerned or surprised when things are difficult right away. That's completely normal. I want to also note that this isn't just some advice that I read anywhere. This is something I'm doing every day for myself. My first job in the industry was as a front-end developer, and now years later I'm working as a full-stack developer leading the front end of my team. I used this both to learn the back end as well as start an online company. So I don't think it's crazy to say that you can use this advice to start building your dream. Now, if you found any of this advice helpful, feel free to subscribe for more content, and don't be afraid to drop a like and a comment, both of which supports the channel. And if you got this far in the video, thank you for your support, and I hope to see you guys again soon.